All right. Last week, we started this two-layered series, and it's kind of a weird thing. Normally, it's just one focus. But over the next 6 weeks, we will be focusing, our foci will be, however, we'll let the English major figure that out. We are going to be talking about two different things. The first thing we're going to be talking about is called Lent, or the season of Lent. And the season of Lent is that 40 days leading up to Easter. It started a couple weeks ago, and Easter is about 5 weeks from now, for those of you who are counting and thinking about that. The season of Lent, as I explained last week, is a time of self-examination, a time where we prepare our hearts for Easter and for that celebration. But it's a time where we prepare our hearts through prayer, through fasting, and through generosity. And so my encouragement to you over the next 5 weeks is to do just that. That's going to be what is behind the scenes of every message I'm doing this next 5 weeks, is this idea of self-examination, allowing God to point out the things in your heart that need to be addressed, that need to be repented of, that need to be healed, whatever the case may be. And so that's what's going on. That's the first layer, the deeper one. The surface layer, the one that's going to be more of what is obvious, is we're going to be talking about Passion Week. And if you don't know what Passion Week is, Passion Week is that week leading up to Easter. It's the time when Jesus rode into Jerusalem on that donkey, and he came into Jerusalem, and we talked about this last week, and the people were shouting, "Hosanna! Hosanna to the King!" Remember, some of you who are here might remember that. That is the beginning of Passion Week. It's the Sunday before Jesus' crucifixion. And so we're going to be talking about that last week of Jesus' life when he was in Jerusalem, the capital city of Israel, and he is really stirring things up, and he's giving his last speeches, and he's having dinner with his disciples, and he's really giving that last push. This is what my kingdom is all about. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And today, we are on Monday. And if things go like I think they're going to, next week we're going to be on Monday also. So last week was Sunday of Passion Week. Jesus rode into Jerusalem. And today is Monday. So let's pray. And then we will talk about what God had to do on Monday through Jesus. Father, I thank you that you are at work, and I ask you please now, would you please anoint me to proclaim truth to your people, to teach and to instruct and to encourage, to correct. God, help me to do the things I need to do. May our hearts be open to receive what you want from us, God. The things, Lord, that you want to poke and prod at, the things you want to shine a light on. Lord, open our eyes to see and to receive from you so that we can become more like Christ. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Last year, you may remember, Jesus rode into Jerusalem. And one of the things that I talked about last week was the idea that Jesus was showing he was the king. Even though there were two other kings in Jerusalem, there were the Roman kings, and in this case, there was actually two of those, Herod and Pilate. And then there was the religious kings, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and those guys who were leading the church of the time, and especially a guy named Caiaphas, which we're going to get to in a minute. But those two kings, symbolically, were representing different aspects of who do we let lead our lives. And are we going to let Jesus lead? Or are we going to let religion or selfishness lead? What are we going to do? How are we going to respond to Jesus wanting to be king? So, this morning, how many of you have seen The Chosen? Okay? If you've seen The Chosen, you have a pretty good idea that every once in a while, about every 2 or 3 episodes, they'll go back in time to the time of David or to the time of Moses, and they'll show a scene or portray a scene from that time period. Excuse me. And so, what we're going to do today is we're going to go back in time to the Jerusalem of Jeremiah's day. This is about 650, 660 years before Jesus came on the scene. And Jeremiah was a prophet. He was a prophet of God, and we know what he had to say through his book, Jeremiah. And Jeremiah was called by God to let the Israelites know, look, guys, God's had enough. You are going to go into captivity. And so Jeremiah came to Jerusalem, and he stood on the temple steps. And the temple might have looked a little bit like this. We're not exactly sure because it was destroyed, because Jeremiah's prophecy came true. But it looked something like this. This is an artist's rendition of what it might have looked like. And so if you look there, you can see there's some steps leading into the temple on the other side of that big urn thing. Okay? There's some steps up there. So more than likely, Jeremiah stood there, or he might have stood over by the altar, but somewhere he stood so that everybody could see him and hear him. And nobody really wanted to hear him because he developed already, in his very short tenure as prophet already, he had developed this thing of only delivering bad news. Which, if you're Israelite, you're going, listen, we already know our northern neighbors, they got taken into captivity, but we're not going to be, because we have got the temple. We have got the presence of God. And they didn't realize, they weren't aware that God's presence had left years ago. Let me share with you what Jeremiah had to say to the people. And this will matter. So picture this. He's on the steps, okay? And he's declaring to the people who don't want to listen to him, this is what God says. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Jeremiah chapter 7. Starting in verse 1. Stand in the gate of the house of the Lord, and there call out this word. Hear the word of the Lord, all you people of Judah who enter through these gates to worship the Lord. This is what the Lord of armies, the God of Israel, says. Correct your ways and your actions, and I will allow you to live in this place. God's given them a chance again. After hundreds of years, he's still giving them chances. Do not trust deceitful words, chanting, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. Instead, if you really correct your ways and your actions, if you act justly towards one another, if you no longer oppress the resident alien, the fatherless, and the widow, and no longer shed innocent blood in this place or follow other gods, bringing harm on yourselves, I will allow you to live in this place. The land I gave to your ancestors long ago. But look, you keep trusting in deceitful words that cannot help. So he's referring here to other prophets who came in and said, Jeremiah doesn't know what he's talking about. God is only going to bless, bless, bless. We've got the temple, temple, temple. They didn't have reverb, so they just had to repeat. No, there was other reasons. Anyway, those false prophets were coming in and saying that stuff, and Jeremiah is saying, they're liars. Don't count on it. Do you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, burn incense to Baal, and follow other gods that you have not known? Then do you come and stand before me in this house that bears my name and say, we are rescued, so we can continue doing all these detestable acts? Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers in your view? Yes, I too have seen it. This is the Lord's declaration. And within a few years, that's what happened. They were taken into captivity. They were completely destroyed. The temple was destroyed. And the people were in Babylon for 70 years or more. Because they thought, I can do whatever I want and then go to church and worship God like nothing's wrong. Fast forward 600 and some odd years later, around 30 A.D., a series of decisions were made to help the people acquire pure animal offerings, as the priests described them. It was the priest's decision to say, this is pure, this isn't. And so to help with that process, for Passover especially, what Caiaphas, the high priest, said was, all right, let's bring all the offerings into the temple proper, so that we as priests and Levites and godly men can determine whether they're actually, what people are purchasing for their offerings are actually clean enough. And of course, because they're special offerings, we have to make sure they're clean enough. That's going to cost a little extra to purchase that. Why did the people have to purchase offerings? Good question. I'm glad you asked. In Deuteronomy, so hundreds of years, thousands of years before this time, God knew that the people would be expanding their country, and to get to the temple, they would have to walk a long ways. And you can't exactly bring a herd of sheep or goats to the temple, or more difficult, a bunch of pigeons to offer to God as the offering, because somewhere along the way there would probably be some animal that decided it needed your lamb worse than you did. So they would sell their lamb where they lived, say in Galilee, and then they would go to Jerusalem, walk the however far it was, go to Jerusalem, and then they would buy their offering there. In Deuteronomy chapter 14, God said, if that place is too distant, where they're going to the offering, and you have been blessed by the Lord your God and cannot carry your tithe, because the place where the Lord will choose to put his name is so far away, then exchange your tithe for silver, take the silver with you, and go to the place the Lord your God will choose, Jerusalem. Use the silver to buy whatever you like, cattle, sheep, wine, other fermented drink, or anything you wish. Then you and your household shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice. God wanted them to party. He wanted them to have these festivals and these times of celebration, and he knew that they couldn't exactly do so if they had to bring these animals along. It'd take too long, it's too much money, etc. And so he provided a way. And so Caiaphas is just, helping them out. But there were a few problems with this setup by the time of Jesus. First of all, by the time of Jesus, Israel was ruled by Rome, right? Okay, so Rome had their own currency. Does anybody know what was on the currency in Rome? Caesar was on the currency in Rome, and that was just one of the many gods that the Romans wanted to worship that were on their currency. And so the temple leadership said, well, we can't have that. We can't have that kind of currency come to the temple and people buy their offerings with ungodly god money. And so they said, no, you have to come and exchange that money for temple currency and then use the temple currency to purchase your animal, your offering. Well, that's all well and good. So now they don't only have animals that they're selling, but they have money changers at the temple. It's starting to get a little crowded. And it's starting to get a little expensive because the money changers are charging a fee as well, as they do today. How many of you have traveled and had to get money for going to Mexico for pesos? Where did you go? Mexico, get pesos. Anybody else? Mom? Yeah, Ukraine's money. You have to go and change it out for American currency. South Africa, Sherry's been to South Africa. Russia. If you go to another country, you're going to have to change out your currency for theirs. No different now than it was then. And just like now, it costs money to do so. And if you go there and do it there, it costs a lot of money because they know they want American dollars. So same thing was going on there. So you've got, they're running the price up for exchanging money. You've got running the price up for the perfect animals rather than just any animal for the offering. And then you've also got just the rent for the stalls, because they couldn't just allow anybody to come in. They had to be people who were approved by the leaders of the temple. Okay? So the leaders of the temple have arranged all of this. The leaders of the temple have charged the stall owners, so the stall owners have to charge the people to get their money back. Are you seeing where it all goes? What's the common phrase, everybody, when you see a problem? What do we follow? The money. Follow the money. Okay? Money changers charged for their services. Animal sellers charged for their services. The temple leaders, especially Caiaphas, who came up with this whole idea. And by the way, Caiaphas is a Roman appointed high priest. That was news to me. As I was studying this, I went, oh, really? He was appointed by Rome. He wasn't just somebody Rome was putting up with. Like Pilate had appointed him and said, you're going to be in charge here. You're going to be my liaison. You're going to be the person that I give money to, and you're going to give money to me to make us all happy. All of this was causing the temple and the heart of the leaders to look just like it did in Jeremiah's time. Very busy, very full, very difficult for the people to get to God. So, we're going to jump ahead from 30 AD when all of this was done by Caiaphas. Caiaphas was like, let's bring them all into the temple and so we can all make money and be happy. 33 AD rolls around and Jesus comes back. According to Mark's gospel, Jesus goes to the temple after he rides into Jerusalem. Riding into Jerusalem was uproar enough, right? I mean, he rides in and Hosanna, and the priests are going, hey, tell him to shut up. If I tell him to shut up, the very rocks will cry out in praise to me. So get used to it. And so he's causing this uproar. The people are going, maybe this is the Messiah. Maybe he's going to go and get his army now. So Jesus comes in. He looks around the temple. And then he goes out. That's on Sunday. And he returns on Monday with a plan. A well thought out and well constructed plan. And I say that because as we read about this, I don't want anybody to think this was just an emotional outburst, an emotional thing that, oh my word, I can't handle it anymore, and he just exploded. No, this was something he had been thinking through for a long time, and definitely overnight. Now, picture again the temple. This is Herod's temple. This is the second temple that had been built by the people. It was started sort of in the time frame of Nehemiah and Ezra, but it had really been added to by Herod, and he wanted the people to think that he was all that in a bag of chips, because he wasn't. And so he needed all the help he could get. And so Herod had built this temple and built up this temple, and now it looks something like this. Okay? And if you look, the main place for the offering is really right here in the center area. This is where the offerings took place. This was the court of women, this is the court of women all around here. And then out here is the court of the Gentiles. And out here, this is called Solomon's portico, or porch. And that's probably where everybody was set up. Okay? And you notice, it's right on the edge. And so if people are coming up here to... So this is where Jesus walks in. Here's what Jesus does in chapter 21 of Matthew. And this is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We're just going to focus on Matthew right now. Jesus went, this is chapter 21, starting in verse 12. Jesus went into the temple and threw out all those buying and selling. Okay? He didn't just say, stop it, you guys. It's not very nice. But he threw them out. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. Here's what I picture. Okay? Well, let me finish reading. Okay, finish reading, Paul, one thing at a time. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves. He said to them, it is written. You might want to turn me down. My house will be called a house of prayer. You are making it a den of thieves. Does that phrase sound familiar? The blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. When the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonders that he did, and the children shouting in the temple, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were indignant and said to him, do you hear what these children are saying? Which is funny. They asked the same question yesterday, and Jesus gives them a similar answer. Jesus replied, yes, have you never read? Haven't you read in the scriptures? Do you know your Bible very well? Okay, this is to the chief leaders of the religion. Okay, they had the Bible memorized backwards, forwards, and some of the books that aren't in there. Okay, these are not lightweights. And Jesus is mocking them, saying, do you happen to know what the Bible has to say about this? You have prepared praise from the mouths of infants and nursing babies. What was he doing, and what can we learn from his action? What was the point? All right, so there is a ton of symbolism here. I would encourage you to study this and look into it, because there was stuff here that I continue to discover. It's kind of like anywhere else in the Bible. If you read the Bible, you will discover stuff no matter how long you read it. There are people, N.T. Wright is in his 70s, I think, and N.T. Wright has been studying the Bible since he was 20-something. He still finds things, as a deep theologian, he still finds things in the Bible. He goes, oh, where did that come from? What's really exciting is when he finds things because his students point them out to him. That's different. Anyway, here we go. So this whole event was well thought out and staged. In fact, we see in John chapter 2, which occurs 1 to 2 years earlier, Jesus has already done this before. So it's not like this is a surprise to the leaders. It's a surprise to the disciples. But the leaders knew he'd done this before. He had told them, stop doing this. And they all brought it all back anyway. They didn't get the message the first time. Jesus quotes two prophets. He says, number one, he's quoting Jeremiah. Okay, we talked about that den of robbers thing. Okay, so he's telling them, look what you guys have done to my house. Now he's using that language. This is my house and my Father's house. But he also says from Isaiah 56, God, that they were supposed to be making the temple a house of prayer. It's supposed to be a place where all of the nations, not just Jewish people, all the nations could come and pray and encounter God together. That's what the temple was made to be. And Jesus was pointing out what the people and even the spiritual leadership already knew. They knew all of this. They just didn't want to admit it. That they had once again failed at their calling to be a light to the nations and had become as corrupt as the nations around them, especially Rome. In fact, one of the other symbolic things that is fascinating to me, I learned this while I was prepping, is that the coin. So you had to have a very specific type of coin to buy your offering. That coin also had a Roman god on it. They just chose to ignore that one. That one didn't bother them as much, even though it was really representative of Baal, the god of the Old Testament. The God they fought against in the Old Testament. So these guys were corrupt, and they knew it, and they were pushing people out for money, and there was so much more. Anyway, the temple leaders heard this loud and clear. Jesus was calling them out, and they knew it, and that was why they immediately said, how can we kill this guy? How can we get rid of him? How can we get the Romans to kill him and make an object of ridicule of him? We want this guy to go away permanently, and everybody that stood with him. And the funny thing is, this is one of Jesus' goals for this week. He wanted them to do that. He didn't come to set up his kingdom like a Roman king. He came to die for us. He came to die on Passover. This was all carefully thought out on his part. He was making, the things that he did were meant to get everybody riled up, so that his crucifixion was inevitable. There's a lot of other stuff. I'm not going to go into it. Just know that there's so much there that Jesus was doing. He wasn't being a lightweight. He wasn't being thoughtless. This was staged. It was thoughtful, and he was ticked. His immediate goal, though, was to clear the way for the poor, the blind, and the lame to come to him and to encounter God. And one of the things that I found interesting that I heard from Dr. Tim Mackey was giving a message at his church. And one of the things he said was, look at who Jesus targeted. He targeted the money changers. Yes, but he also targeted the people selling pigeons and doves. Why? Why did Matthew specifically mention that part? Here's why. Because in Leviticus 5:7, God says, anyone who cannot afford a lamb is to bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons to the Lord as a penalty for their sin. One for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. Jesus, in targeting those dove and pigeon sellers, was targeting people who were especially taking care of the poor, the lame, and the needy. The people who are close to God's heart. And they were keeping those people, or making it difficult for those people to get to God. So, Jesus clears out the people who are making it difficult for the poor to get to God. Jesus clears out the clutter that is making it difficult for everybody to get to God. He clears out the things that are keeping people out of the temple because they have to get through this crowd of sellers and stalls. And Jesus also let people acknowledge, oh yeah, this is the King. In fact, I would even go so far as to say he was showing by example how children can hear from and connect with God, because recognize the children were being prophetic. They were saying to everybody around, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna to the Son of David. They were saying to anybody that were listening. The kids were saying, hey, look, this is the Son of David. This is the Messiah. Are you guys watching? And of course, like most